You really shouldn't be here. People like you lower the tone of the whole room. My sister-in-law said it quietly, the way people say things they want you to hear but can't be held accountable for. She had that smile on, the one she practiced in mirrors, all teeth and no warmth. Then she reached across me, deliberately, and knocked a full glass of red wine off the tray I was holding. Merlot. A good one. It soaked through my blazer, through my shirt. Cold and heavy against my ribs. The room didn't stop. A few heads turned. My brother was 3 meters away. He saw it. He laughed at something his business partner said and reached for another canopy. I didn't move. I didn't reach for a napkin. I looked at my watch. It was 7:42. I decided that by 7:45, the entire evening would be over. But before I tell you how I legally ended my own brother's engagement party in under 3 minutes, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I want to see how far this story travels. Her name was Renata, my brother's fiancée. She came from money, not the quiet kind, but the kind that needs to be mentioned in the first 30 seconds of meeting someone. Her father had sold a chain of dental clinics across Alberta. She had grown up in a house in Aspen Woods with a 3-car garage and a kitchen island the size of a small boat. She had never had to want for anything, and because of that, she had developed a particular talent for identifying people who had, and then making them feel it. She had been doing it to me for 2 years. Subtle things first. Comments about my car. Questions about whether I was still renting. A pause before she introduced me at parties, as if she had to remember who exactly I was and decide whether it was worth the effort. My brother Garrett never noticed. Or he noticed and decided it wasn't worth the effort of caring, which amounts to the same thing. I hadn't come tonight because I wanted to. I came because my mother called me 4 times in 1 week and told me that if I skipped Garrett's engagement party, I would be the one tearing the family apart. So I came. I wore a blazer I bought secondhand at a Value Village on Macalio Trail because I genuinely don't care about clothes, and because I had spent most of my disposable income that month on something else entirely. I showed up. I smiled at the right people. I held a drinks tray for 20 minutes because one of the catering staff had stepped out and someone needed to do it, and I didn't mind. That was when Renata found me. She had been watching me from across the room with that calculating expression I had come to recognize, the look of someone doing arithmetic. She saw the blazer. She saw the second-hand seams. She saw a woman who looked out of place in a room full of new money and decided I was the safest target in the room. She walked over with 2 of her bridesmaids trailing behind her like punctuation marks and said what she said, and then she knocked the wine onto me and she waited. She was waiting for the tears. The stammering. The apology, actually. She wanted me to apologize. That's how it always worked. The person who got humiliated ends up apologizing for causing a scene. I had watched her do it to a junior colleague of Garrett's at Christmas. The colleague apologized. Renata glowed for the rest of the evening. I didn't apologize. I stood there and let the cold wine soak through my shirt, and I looked at my watch and I made a decision. Her mother, Sylvia, appeared from nowhere. Sylvia worked in corporate HR for an oil and gas company downtown. She was the kind of woman who had made a career out of managing people by making them feel small and then offering them an exit that looked like kindness. She materialized at Renata's elbow and gripped my arm with manicured fingers and steered me away from the family table, away from the center of the room, speaking softly with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Let's just get you out of the way while we sort this out," she said. "You're a bit of a distraction right now." She walked me past the bar cart, past the photographer setting up for the formal shots, past the cluster of Garrett's university friends who didn't look up. She stopped at a folding table near the service entrance, half hidden behind a portable coat rack. There was a venue coordinator there eating a protein bar, a second photographer changing a memory card. This was where the help sat. "Stay here," Sylvia said, smoothing her dress. "And maybe don't make eye contact with the guests. You're not really dressed for mingling." She walked back into the room. I sat down. I looked across at Garrett. He was standing at the center of a circle of people, golden and easy, his arm around Renata's shoulders. He had watched the whole thing. He had watched his fiancée humiliate me in front of 60 people, and he had done exactly nothing. He caught my eye from across the room. He gave me a small shrug, the kind of shrug that says, "You know how she is," and then turned back to his conversation. That shrug, I had been making excuses for that shrug my entire life. I sat at the folding table and I let myself look at the room the way I hadn't let myself look at it in years. The crystal glassware. The catered food from a company I recognized. The venue itself, a converted heritage building in the East Village, all exposed brick and warm lighting, and a heritage designation that made it genuinely difficult to book. I know how difficult it is to book because I own it. I should explain. I don't work in hospitality. I work in commercial real estate investment. Specifically, I find distressed properties, buildings that are bleeding money, heritage sites that can't carry their own operating costs, event venues drowning in deferred maintenance, and I buy them. I spend 2 or 3 years and everything I have fixing them, and then they become something worth having. I bought the Linden House 4 years ago when it was 6 months from receivership. The heritage designation meant it couldn't be torn down, which meant the previous owner couldn't sell to a developer, which meant it just sat there deteriorating and costing money. The bank was desperate. I paid less than the assessed value of the land alone. I put 2.5 years of my life into that building. I replaced the HVAC system. I restored the original hardwood. I hired a venue manager, a full catering coordinator, and a team I trusted completely. I never told my family, not because I was planning some elaborate reveal. I didn't tell them because I knew what would happen if I did. I knew Garrett wouldn't see his sister. He'd see a resource. I had watched him look at every person in his life and calculate what he could get from them before he decided how much to care about them. I had learned that lesson at considerable personal cost. I sat at the folding table, the wine going cold against my skin, and I let myself open the ledger I had been keeping closed for years. I thought about the winter I was 27. I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Forest Lawn, which is not the nice part of Calgary, and I was eating rice and canned lentils 4 nights a week. Not because I was broke, because I had just sent $11,000 to my parents to cover the arrears on their mortgage. The bank had sent a notice of default. My mother had called me crying. I had moved the money the same afternoon. I wore my winter coat inside my apartment for 2 months because I was keeping the thermostat at 16 degrees to save on utilities. Garrett was living in a 2-bedroom condo in Beltline. He had nice furniture. I thought about Garrett's business. He had started a logistics consulting firm 3 years ago. He needed capital to get off the ground. My father had called me, embarrassed, asking if I could help. I had liquidated an RRSP, paid the early withdrawal penalty and the income tax on top of it, and transferred $40,000 to Garrett's business account. I didn't ask for equity. I didn't ask for a repayment schedule. I just moved the money. He never mentioned it again. Not once in 3 years. Not a thank you, not a check-in, not a single acknowledgement that it had happened. When Renata started coming to family dinners and asking pointed questions about what everyone did for work, Garrett described me as in real estate, sort of, with a vague hand gesture that communicated he wasn't entirely sure and wasn't particularly interested in finding out. I looked at Renata moving through the room, radiant, practiced, expensive. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my monthly mortgage. She had just knocked wine on a woman she thought was nobody. She had not made a mistake. She had made a calculation. And like Garrett's shrug and Sylvia's manicured grip on my arm, it was a calculation that assumed I had no options. They were wrong. I took my phone out of my jacket pocket. I opened the property management portal for the Linden House. I looked at the event record. Booking confirmed. Client, Garrett and Renata. Status, active. I scrolled to the contract section. I didn't need to read it. I had written every clause in it myself, after a difficult incident 2 years ago when a client's guest had verbally abused a member of my catering staff until she cried in the walk-in refrigerator. I had drafted the conduct policy the following week. Section 9, Clause C, Conduct and Respect Protocol. It gave the property owner unilateral authority to terminate any event, without refund, if a client or their guests engaged in harassment, intimidation, or physical aggression directed at staff, contractors, or ownership. No warning required. No negotiation. Renata had just poured wine on the owner. I looked across the room at Ryan, my venue manager. He was standing near the bar doing what venue managers do at events that are running smoothly, which is look calm and watch everything. I sent him a message, Section 9C, Renata, execute now. I watched him read it. I watched his eyebrows go up. He looked at me. I nodded once. He pressed his earpiece and started moving. I stood up from the folding table. I didn't smooth my blazer. I walked past the coat rack, past the service entrance, past the photographer who was still changing his memory card, and I stepped into the main room. The DJ booth was on a low platform at the far end of the space. Ryan got there before me. He had a quiet word with the DJ. I saw the DJ's expression shift from confusion to compliance, and then the music stopped. Not faded. Stopped. The turntable drag of an abrupt cut. The room reacted the way rooms do when something unexpected happens. The conversation stuttered. People looked around. Renata, in the middle of the dance floor with two of her bridesmaids, looked toward the booth with an irritated expression. "What's happening, Tyler? What are you doing?" The house lights came up. The warm amber dimming we had spent 45 minutes calibrating before the event disappeared, replaced by the full overhead lighting we used for setup and breakdown. It was stark and flat, and it made everyone look exactly like who they were. Ryan handed me the microphone. I walked to the center of the platform. The feedback ring when I took the mic made half the room flinch. I waited for it to settle. "I apologize for the interruption," I said. My voice came out even. I had not planned to be calm, but I was. There is a specific kind of clarity that arrives when you stop trying to manage other people's feelings. I had been managing feelings in this room for years. I was done. Renata had already spotted me. She was staring at the stage with an expression that moved quickly through confusion and landed on contempt. "Are you serious right now?" Her voice carried easily in the sudden quiet. "Someone get her off the stage. She's going to embarrass herself." Sylvia was moving toward me from the left side of the room, her HR composure firmly in place, her voice low and controlled. "I need you to come down from there right now. This is not appropriate." "Hi, Sylvia," I said into the microphone. "I'm going to need you to stop." She stopped, partly from surprise. "My name is Ivy Sterling," I said to the room. "Most of you know me as Garrett's sister. A few of you have met me before. What most of you don't know, because I never felt the need to mention it, is that I'm also the owner of this property." The room made a sound. Not words. Just a collective intake. I purchased the Linden House 4 years ago, and I've operated it since. Every detail you're enjoying tonight, the restored flooring, the catering, the lighting you were just standing in, I built that. And as the owner of this venue, I have the legal authority to terminate events under Section 9, Clause C of our standard rental agreement, which covers conduct and respect violations against ownership and staff. I looked at Renata. 40 minutes ago, you deliberately knocked a full glass of wine onto me while making comments about my clothing and my place in this room. I am the owner of this room. That constitutes a violation of the conduct clause you signed when you booked this event. Renata's composure cracked. Not all at once. It went in stages. First the disbelief, then the calculation about whether I was bluffing, then the moment she decided I wasn't, and then she did what people do when the architecture of their power collapses. She got loud. "You are lying," she said. Her voice had lost its practiced smoothness. "You are broke," Garrett told me. "You borrowed rent money from your parents last year." "Garrett was wrong about that," I said, "and I'll explain why in a moment." "This is insane," Garrett said. He had pushed through the crowd to the edge of the platform. His face had gone through several colors since I started speaking and had settled on something that looked like panic, dressed up as anger. "She's not well. She does this. She makes things up to get attention. Ivy, come down from there right now." The room was watching him now, watching both of us. "She's had too much to drink," he continued, and he almost made it sound convincing. "She's been going through a hard time. There's no need to make a scene." I had watched my brother pivot like this my entire life. The moment something stopped going his way, he would locate someone nearby and reframe them as a problem, and then he would manage the room around that framing. I had seen him do it to colleagues. I had seen him do it to friends. I had never been the one standing at the microphone while he did it to me. I haven't had anything to drink, I said. I've been holding the tray. A few people in the room laughed, not unkindly, just the involuntary kind. Garrett, I said, I need you to let me finish. Then you can say whatever you want. He looked like he wanted to take the microphone. He didn't. I took my phone out again. The venue had a presentation screen, a large wall-mounted display we used for slideshows and speeches. I connected to it through the venue management app. The engagement photos that had been cycling on the screen since the guests arrived disappeared, replaced by a land title document, Alberta Land Title. Document Alberta Land Titles. Property address, 1240 9th Avenue, SEE. Registered owner, Linden Holdings, Inc. That's the title for this building, I said. Linden Holdings is my company. I swiped to the next document. Corporate Registry. Linden Holdings, Inc. Sole Director and Officer, Ivy Catherine Sterling. The room was very quiet. I swiped again. This is a loan agreement, I said. The borrowers are Frank and Audrey Sterling, my parents. 3 years ago, they were facing a notice of default on their home in Varsity. Rather than lose the house, my father reached out to a private lender. That lender was me, through a holding company, because my father was embarrassed and asked me to keep it anonymous. I paused. He made the same request when I covered Garrett's startup capital. I honor both requests. I kept it anonymous for years. Tonight seems like the appropriate time to stop. Someone in the back of the room said something I couldn't hear. Garrett had gone very still. That means, I continued, that the house your parents live in, Garrett, the house you grew up in, the house you still bring laundry to on Sundays, is held by a private mortgage I own. I've never once threatened to call it. I never intended to. I was your sister. I just wanted you to be okay. I lowered the phone. You watched your fiancé pour wine on me tonight. You watched her mother escort me to the back of the room like I was a coat that needed checking. You shrugged at me. I let that sit for a moment. I have never once in my entire adult life asked this family for anything. I have wired money when it was needed. I have stayed quiet when it was easier. I have shown up to parties I didn't want to attend in blazers I bought at Value Village because I genuinely do not care about the things you have all spent so much energy caring about. And what I got back was a shrug. The room was the quietest I had ever heard a room full of people be. Under Section 9C of your rental contract, I said, this event is terminated, effective immediately. All guests are asked to collect their belongings and exit through the main doors within the next 10 minutes. Renata, Garrett, Sylvia. If you have personal items at the venue, my coordinator Ryan will help you retrieve them. If anyone has not vacated the premises by 8 o'clock, I will be contacting Calgary Police Service and asking them to assist. I set the microphone on the stand. What happened next was not a single thing. It was several things at once, a room-wide detonation. Renata's voice, Sylvia's voice, Garrett's voice, all at different pitches and different registers, and somewhere underneath it, all the sound of 60 people collectively deciding where they stood. Renata charged the stage. Her hair had come loose. Her composed, practiced, expensive exterior had come apart completely, and underneath it there was just a person who had built her entire identity on being the most important person in any given room, and she had just lost the room. You have no right, she said, her voice ragged. You planned this. You set me up. You waited for a reason. I've had reasons for 2 years, I said quietly. Tonight you gave me a contract violation. Sylvia tried a different approach. She straightened, gathered herself, and said with complete corporate authority, I'm going to advise you that this constitutes intentional infliction of emotional distress, and we will be pursuing legal remedies. I'll have my lawyer's information sent to you tomorrow, I said. Ryan can take your contact details. Garrett found me near the service entrance as the room was emptying. He had been standing in the same spot for 7 minutes. I had watched him, and whatever he was feeling had cycled through enough stages that by the time he got to me, he looked mostly like someone who had not slept in a week. You could have told me, he said, about the building, about the mortgage. You could have just told me. I tried, I said. For years, I tried to have a version of a relationship with you where that information would have been safe. You never made it safe. You never made it safe. Every time I started to tell you something real about my life, you found a way to use it. He didn't argue with that. What happens now, he said, with Mom and Dad's mortgage? Nothing, I said. Nothing happens. They can stay in the house. I have no intention of calling the loan. I never did. That was never the point. Then what was the point? I thought about the winter with the thermostat at 16 degrees. I thought about the RRSP withdrawal and the tax hit I was still carrying. I thought about every Sunday dinner where Renata made a comment and Garrett looked the other way, and I sat there and smiled and said nothing because I was trying to keep the peace, and the peace kept costing me something. The point, I said, is that I'm done paying for peace that was never actually peaceful. I picked up my bag from the folding table near the service entrance. The catering staff were already beginning the breakdown. The coordinator gave me a small nod as I passed. The photographer, who had finally finished changing his memory card, gave me a look I couldn't quite read but that felt something like awe. I walked out to the main entrance of a building I owned, on a street I'd walked 100 times, in a blazer that still smelled like Merlot, and I did not look back. My parents called that night. I let it go to voicemail. They called twice more before midnight. I listened to the messages in the morning with a cup of coffee, sitting at the kitchen table in my actual home, not the forest lawn apartment, not anywhere anyone in my family had ever visited. And I felt, for the first time in a long time, like the space around me was mine, not earned by being small, not maintained by staying quiet, just mine. Garrett texted 2 days later. 4 words, "Can we talk soon?" I read it. I put my phone down. I thought about whether the version of a relationship I actually wanted with my brother was possible, or whether I was just hoping for a different version of the same shrug. I didn't answer that day. I wasn't sure I had the answer yet. What I knew was that I'd spent years believing that loyalty meant absorbing things quietly. That being the one who held everything together meant you had to let yourself be the one everyone leaned on without asking how you were doing underneath the weight. I had confused endurance with love. I had called it family. The mortgage still stands. The building is still mine. The relationship, the version of it that ran on my silence and their comfort, is done. Not because I planned it that way, not because I walked into that party with a strategy, but because there is a moment when the cost of keeping quiet finally exceeds what you've left to spend. I reached that moment at 7:42 on a Tuesday evening in a room I built with my own money, wearing a wine-soaked blazer from Value Village. I don't regret a single minute of it. I've thought a lot about the moment Garrett shrugged at me, not the wine, not what Renata said, the shrug. Because that's the thing I keep coming back to. Not the cruelty of strangers, but the quiet permission given by someone who was supposed to be on my side. I spent years telling myself that staying quiet was the generous thing to do, that absorbing the small humiliations without complaint was a form of love, the kind that holds a family together when nothing else will. I believed that. I think a part of me needed to believe it, because the alternative, that I was disappearing myself to protect people who never once asked how I was doing underneath all of it, was too heavy to look at directly. What I understand now is that Renata wasn't the problem. She was just the one who finally made the cost visible. The moment she knocked that glass onto me and Garrett shrugged, something shifted. Not in them. In me. I'd been running a kind of internal accounting for years without admitting what the ledger actually said. That night I finally looked at the numbers. There's something I've come to believe about the way choices accumulate. Every time I wired money in silence, every time I swallowed a comment at a dinner table, every time I told myself it wasn't worth the conflict. Those were choices too, not passive ones. I was actively choosing to make myself smaller to keep the peace. And the thing about that kind of peace is that it's not actually peaceful. It's just quiet. There's a difference. What I had to develop. Slowly, over years of working alone and making hard calls in empty offices, was the ability to know the difference between endurance and self-erasure. That's not something anyone teaches you directly. It's something you figure out at 7:42 on a Tuesday night when you're standing in a room you built with your own hands, and someone who owes you everything is looking through you like you're furniture. The strength it took to walk onto that stage wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge either, despite how it might have looked from the outside. It was the result of having thought clearly over a long time about what was actually happening and what it was costing me. You can only act with that kind of precision when you've done the honest work of understanding your situation, not the version you wish were true, but the version it actually is. Renata calculated that I was weak because I was quiet. Sylvia assumed I had no options because I didn't advertise them. Gareth thought he understood my life because I had never corrected his assumptions. What none of them accounted for was the discipline it takes to build something real over years, in private, without external validation. That kind of discipline comes from deciding, very early on, what actually matters and then refusing to trade it for comfort. I don't think people like Renata are evil. I think they are people who have never been asked to develop much in the way of character, because their circumstances never required it. When everything comes easily, you don't build the muscle. And when something finally goes wrong, there's no foundation there, just noise. I think about who I was in that forest lawn apartment with the thermostat at 16 degrees, and I don't feel sorry for her. I feel respect for her. She made choices I wouldn't undo. She knew something that took me years to articulate, that what you build in the hard, quiet seasons is yours in a way that nothing handed to you ever quite is. That's what I want to remember, long after the evening at the Linden house fades. Not the look on Renata's face, not the silence in the room when I said my name, just that version of me in 2 sweaters, eating lentils, wiring money to people who would one day shrug at her, and choosing, anyway, to keep going. That's the only thing that was ever really mine to decide.